Good afternoon, everyone, and I'd like to thank you all for joining the webinar this afternoon. My name's Sophie Erskine, and I'm the Programme Manager for Asset Management at BSI. We're going to be listening to 3 short presentations from members of the BSI Asset Management Committee. So that's Tim Ingram, who's the Chair of AMS1, John Woodhouse and Claire Gowson. You may have noticed that all participants have been muted, and that will remain so throughout the 20-minute presentations. Once the presentations are finished, I'll unmute everybody so that you're all free to ask questions. And we'll be finishing by 3 p.m. this afternoon. And with that, I'd like to hand over to Tim Ingram, who's going to kick off the presentations.
Many thanks, Sophie. I trust you can hear me still. So as Sophie says, my name is Tim Ingram, and I am the chair of something called AMS1, which is the UK's mirror committee for asset management in the UK. So we look after the 55,000 series of standards. I've not been with the committee too long, maybe about 6-8 months, something like that. So I've got 2 much more able bodies with me in the form of John Woodhouse and Claire Gowson to help give a bit of an overview of what's been going on over the last couple of years. Since the 2014 release of 55,000 and the 55,000 series, there's been a lot of really good learning, a lot of adoption, a lot of experience from across about 31 countries. So the International Committee TC251, which we support, has been working very hard in the background to pull all that information together. And John is going to give us an overview of that. And without further ado, let's get into it. So, John, if you could take us through the update of 55,002, please.
Lovely. Thank you, Tim. And welcome, everybody. John Woodhouse. I've been rattling around the asset management standards game since the early days of developing PAS 55 with BSI, and then ongoing, of course, into the transition into the ISO 55000 family. So I'm delighted to give you the latest update on the work that's been going on over the last couple of years. I should set the scene a little bit. The 55,002 document, I hope you are aware, is the guidance document to support the requirement specification in 55,001 and the definitions, terminology and introduction in the 55,000 front document. So what we're talking about today is an update to the guidance for implementing an asset management system to meet the requirements of 55,001. In the original development of these standards, this guidance document was the last to achieve publication readiness, and as a result, possibly got not as much focus as the more specific requirements in 01 and the definitions in 00. So the 02 document has been the first to receive an upgrade, and as Tim has said, a lot of that has come from the involvement with the feedback of those who have been looking at the implementations of 55,001 over all the participating countries. That's participating in the TC251 committee responsible for standards. And I'm very glad to say that the pragmatism and the practical intelligibility of this guidance is enormously. It's nearly, well, it's over twice the amount of material now, expanding on pretty much every area of explanation and illustration. And there's now 6 annexes as well, expanding on particular topics that organizations feel particularly critical for their interpretation and application. The most important, perhaps, it's happening every time I'm clicking the button. Let's try that approach. The most important message of the new guidance are these 7 cross-cutting subjects. This reflects the recognition that a management system that's broken into segments in line with the ISO structure for such guidance, the numbers down the left-hand side, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10, are now completely standardized for all management system standards. So the quality standard, environmental standard, health and safety, all have the same structure now, what's called Annex SL. In asset management, such an important feature of it is the integration and alignments across different roles and responsibilities and business processes and at different layers in the business, in the organizational leadership, operations, strategic planning, execution, operations support, and so on. So these cross-cutting subjects turn out to be particularly important for the asset management system as opposed to other management systems. So they've been expanded a lot, and they're the ones I'm going to focus on in the whistle-stop tour that we're doing this afternoon. The first of them is clarity of what we mean by value. Asset management is defined as the realization of value from the stuff we have, the assets, but of course that means we need to understand what we recognize as value. So this guidance has expanded the definition, the attributes of value, how it can be demonstrated to being generated through the better management of assets, as distinct from the common usage of the term, the values, plural, of the organization, because obviously they represent attributes perceived to be of particular importance. They're not conflicting, of course, because what is important to the organization is invested in its goals and its targets and its strategies, and indeed asset management is designed to deliver against those. But the success, the degree of success for the effort involved, the value for money, the degree of satisfaction of those stakeholder expectations, that is much clearer in the new guidance. And indeed, obviously, the acknowledgement that there are trade-offs involved, because we're talking about the value to different people, different organizations, different entities, and there's compromise to be obtained. So across the asset portfolio, how are we juggling costs and risks and performance to deliver best bang for the buck? That is a particular focus, and it covers right across all the segments of the requirement specification. It's one of the cross-cutting subjects. The scope has proved an interesting discussion, particularly as organizations are also different parts of the asset management responsibility, not just the design, build, or procure. The operate and maintain might be done by other organizations. So the guiding mind, the responsibility for making it all hang together, that is the role of the management system, has to take account of those context attributes, who's doing which bits of managing of assets and the strategic direction-making aspects, where does this decision-making lie, how proportional is it to the different criticalities and dependencies on different assets, and the relationship management with the various contractors and supply chain. This has proved extremely valuable in understanding where the buck stops, and in particular, how to define the assets that fall within whose asset management system. So as you see on the bottom line here, it's been helpful also to define who can be adequately or demonstrate their capabilities to be certified as compliant with the ISO 55001 standard. Because obviously we have to understand what assets are being managed within the management system and what are the boundaries of responsibility that are associated with that. So clarification as to in what circumstance a service provider can take on a mandated management role for the assets that belong to somebody else, and the clarity of inclusions for that. In the original development of the ISO family, the discussion about strategic planning, and indeed what we used to call in PAS 55 language the asset management strategy, was very much built in as we collated the documents towards the end of the development cycle. So there's not much guidance in the old documents on this. And we've made a big effort to expand understanding of what it is, why it is, and how a SAMP glues together the strategic objectives of the organization into asset management objectives and manifests into the various more concrete plans for execution. We are slightly hampered by ISO's requirements not to introduce the concept of a strategy in any management systems. So we've got away with it by calling it a strategic asset management plan, which is why the acronym is used so widely. This complements, and indeed we're getting a lot of convergence between the ISO published material and the sort of guidebooks being published by the Institute of Asset Management on this topic. So understanding what it is, why it is, what the typical contents looks like, and how to get the alignment between strategic direction and concrete execution plans. That, of course, is another cross-cutting topic because it needs to be manifest in each areas of the requirement specification. A lot of comment and feedback and interest in what do we mean by adequate decision making in asset management, and clearly that's at the very core of good asset management, is appropriate value-based decision making. And the guidelines have expanded on what that might look like and what a decision-making framework, a structure for such decision-making needs to include, particularly in terms of clarity of the processes to be applied and the thresholds or decision-making criteria that will be used more consistently, and how that reflects different levels of responsibility, authority, and governance, and the alignment between the functional role and decision-making freedoms that requires to make the optimal way forward. Risk management has been obviously a very close tie in the ISO guidelines 31000 on a risk management system. The expansion of topic in 55002 is how to hang that together within an asset management system. So risk management within asset management. And it does bring specific attributes that are special, because in the world of asset management, we often find risks that are changing with time. And although those are mentioned in previous versions of the documents, the implementation of a risk management approach that meets asset management circumstances, in other words, asset management related risks. These are expanded on in the new guidelines. Finally, the cross-cutting topic of financial interface has been addressed fairly significantly, and indeed you're going to hear a little bit more about that from Claire shortly. In the guidelines, there's a specific annex now talking about the desirability and some of the ideas on method for aligning the technical view of assets, for example, physical assets and physical asset registers and the value of those assets, with the financial perspective of how they've been reflected in the balance sheet, how the value is depreciated over time, how assets are identified. The convergence of these two viewpoints has proven to be a very important part of maturity in joined-up asset management, irrespective actually of what the assets are. Now, these are expanded, as I say, in an annex of the 55,000 documentation, but we've still got ongoing work in that area, which Claire is going to talk about in a second as one of the other pieces of work. But as we round up on the subject of 55,000 cross-cutting subjects, I'd just like to say that this represents a catch-up, quite a significant catch-up on material that we didn't get time to include in the first round of publication of the 55,000 family. It's laying the ground rules for what we're going to do in the future for updating the 55,000 and 55,001 requirement specification, but this reflects a significant amount of practical experience of implementing the current standards. So hopefully it will be very helpful. It does indeed align with quite a lot of other published material of educational and practical illustration that's out there as well, but this consolidates it in one area, being the 55,000 family of standards. So without further ado, I'm going to pass over to Claire now to talk about what's continuing in this direction of travel for increased clarity and guidance.
Hi John, thanks very much. Good afternoon everyone. We wanted to, as well as giving you an update on the specifics of the 55,002 changes, talk to you a little bit about communications that our committee is doing. So the committee that's members that are here represent the UK at TC251, which is the Asset Management Committee. That's what that means. And we're trying very hard, as Tim referred to improve our communication so that we can better represent UK industry. So what we want to talk to you about was where you can firstly get some more information about 55,001 and the new 55,002. There are some links included in these slides, which I'm sure we can share with you afterwards. But specifically, you can get more information on the TC251 website itself. There is a leaflet summarising all of the high-level details if you want to share that with colleagues and explain what 55001 and 55002 are. You can also take a look at the BSI website where the standard is available. And usefully, there is a whole playlist of YouTube videos which explain in a little bit more detail the changes that John has just described to you. So if you go to YouTube and just type in TC251, you will find the playlist. They're not very long, only about a minute or so each. There are 9 videos, so ends up being about 10 minutes worth of explanation if you want to share that with other people. That might be useful to share with colleagues and collate views that you can feed back to us, because we're really interested in getting your opinion on how 55001 and your experiences implementing asset management are working out. We set up a number of communication channels quite recently to that end. So if you'd like to share your implementation experiences with us, there's an email address that you can use there. You can also find our Asset Management Committee on LinkedIn. You need to request to join it, but we're not that picky, so come and make friends with us on LinkedIn, and you can take part in our debates and share your experiences that way. And if you're interested in yourself helping us to represent the views of UK industry in the development of ISO 55001 on an ongoing basis, then you could apply to join the UK committee or just contribute your views to us and your experiences so that we can represent your thoughts that way. That doesn't need to be a massively formal exercise, so we're not asking you to fill in 50 forms and have phone calls with us every week. We're just interested in making sure that we're representative, so don't be shy in putting your opinions forward. Now, there are 3 particular topics of interest that are shown here. John mentioned that we have ongoing work to develop guidance about asset management, and one of those is ISO, I'm not sure how to say this, 55010, I think that's what we're saying, which provides even more information on the guidance about financial and non-financial functions, because we had too much to put in one appendix of 55002. So we're drafting that currently, and we're at the stage that we need to get feedback from people. So if you're interested in representing the thoughts of UK industry on that, please contact us, because we might be able to share the standard with you and get your feedback. Similarly, there's a further standard that's associated with 55,000, which is really aimed at government policymakers. Because so many assets are significant enough to be impacted by government policy in terms of infrastructure, we recognise that a lot of the decisions that 55001 touch on actually extend beyond the companies that might be operating them and are affected by decisions that are made by the UK government. And so we have produced a guidance document that is aimed at policymakers, which we're similarly interested in getting feedback on. So if you would like to get involved in that, please contact us and we might be able to share the standard and get your thoughts on it. Now, finally, case studies. I've talked a lot about your implementation experiences. If you don't want to give formal feedback on our documents, we'd still like to know what your experiences implementing 55001 have been, for good or ill, because they help us to develop the standard and share good practice and perhaps lessons learned elsewhere. So, yeah, don't be shy. Feel free to share your case studies with us formally, by email, or just stick them on our LinkedIn page and start a conversation. I think I have a few screenshots to follow, John, which just show what the websites look like so that people recognise them when they bump into them. So if you just flick through those slowly, that will be handy. So while you're doing that, John, if you are using if you're familiar with the WebEx system, you'll see that you're able to wave your hand to ask a question. So if you've got any questions for the people on this call about 55002 or about involvement in standard development, then just wave your hand and the BSI team will unmute you so that you can ask your question.
I was asking to go to the next slide, which was to there you go.
Do we have any waving hands, Sophie?
Sounds fairly quiet. If there's any waving hands, yeah. Sounds like everybody understands every part of it.
We definitely need them on our team then.
No, they've all been muted, and I'm just wondering whether everybody's able to unmute. I don't see any hands raised. I do see one or two members of TC251 on, and I wonder if they're welcome. If so, please put up your hand.
But one thing I'd like to say on behalf of the AMS1 is a big thank you to John and to Claire for taking some time out and making those presentations, and to the wider TC for the efforts and the materials that are coming forth. If you do get a chance to look at those websites, there's some really good information on there, as Claire's mentioned, some really good articles. And the feedback I've had from 55,002 so far has been all really positive. Phrases like much better document, it really speaks to the applications. I've not had anyone come up to me yet and say it's terrible, it's not doing the right job. Maybe they wouldn't anyway, I'm not sure. But yeah, go on, any questions at all for us while we're all here?
And while you're thinking of those questions, I'll make an observation about the UK take-up of 55,000. We've been quietly getting on with it in the UK. The international community has made of the successes and progress. I think probably because in the UK we've migrated, many organisations already had PAS 55 certification and then migrated across to the ISO 55000 variant. A lot of the discussion I'm hearing is, where do we go once we've achieved the status of accredited management system against 55001? In other words, what does excellence look like rather than competency and aligned certification? That is indeed one of the intensive discussions with regard to future continual improvement of the standard. Standards have to move on and raise the bar progressively in the spirit of continual improvement, setting the bar that's appropriate to demonstrate that we're constantly refreshing and refining. There are two or three topics in which 55,000 is more onerous and more rigorous, if you like, than the PAS 55 state, namely in the requirement for context, understanding and alignment, and in the leadership areas. And there's another area where probably PAS 55 was a bit more explicit, which in the area of optimization and decision making. So what we're looking at, not just in terms of improving the guidance for the 55,002 that we've announced today, but as Claire has described, where are the areas where we need to raise the bar in the future as well? Because the lead time to trickle down into standardization is very long. We're talking at least 4 years before something gets achieved sufficient international consensus between the various standards bodies. So we have to think well ahead in terms of the direction of travel and the degree of aspiration. And I'm delighted to observe that really it's taken 2 years to make this update for the 55,002 document. It should push us along well in terms of the number of organizations correctly interpreting the standards and implementing them. But that also should generate a lot more feedback in terms of where else should we provide greater help, or toughen up the standard, or even relax it in some respects. So this is a wider brainstorm than just, here's another document to provide more explanation of existing material. It's setting a marker, if you like, for, okay, so this is now pretty consolidated, so what can we anticipate over the next 3, 4, 5 years ahead?
Absolutely, Joe. I definitely echo that. And I think something you touched on there is I think it's a bit of a misconception of the asset management standards that tends to be taken up around this idea of the certification, that if we get the certification, we're there, we're done. When I think most asset management professionals now recognise is the start of the journey, isn't it? It's the ability to know that you've got a platform to work from and to start improving and to take the business forward, really.
I think I can see that there are quite a few call-in users to this, and that means I'm not sure that they can see the slides. So I just wonder whether the BSI team could let us know when the slides might be available and if we're going to share those.
Sophie, could you give us guidance on that, please? Deathly silence. Let's see if we can...
I'm pretty sure that we'll be able to...
I'm sure we will. Upload.
I'm pretty sure we'll be able to share the slides with everybody, but if any of you have got any questions that you want to ask us offline, then you can drop us an email or find us on LinkedIn, and we're more than happy to have a discussion with you.
Hello, Claire, can you hear me?
Yes.
It's Sophie Erskine from BSI. We're going to...
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Okay. Yes, we'll be sharing the slides directly after the directly after the WebEx, just as soon as we can get the email together to email them to everybody. And we're going to be unmuting all the participants at the moment.
I've actually got a question that's just come in. The question is, which sectors going forward do you see an increase in their usage of the standard series ISO 55000? If everybody heard that.
Yeah, so I'll start, if that's all right. I think one thing we're currently doing at the moment within the committee is having a look at our representation internally, because we recognise, picking up on John's point in terms of directions of travel, there's a lot of sectors that aren't necessarily picking this up at the moment. There's some movement towards the likes of the manufacturing sectors that haven't fully embraced it yet, but I think that is more because we're looking towards they need a little bit more support around the design end to make sure they build the plants in the right way to begin with. And I think design, BIM, those kind of areas where it's more at the front end is something that I think there's going to be a lot more uptake on. But also service provision. There's a lot of work going in at the moment to try and help articulate how to apply asset management over things like thin primes, where potentially the risk is being disseminated much lower down into the supply chain, and how that can be taken forward is definitely a key area of note. I mean, John, I don't know if you've got any views.
Yeah, when the Institute of Asset Management developed the maturity guide a couple of years ago, we looked at which industries or public-private sectors were most likely to benefit from a management system for its asset management. And we developed a couple of axes in terms of the volume and complexity of the asset portfolio and the criticality of the average range of assets. And of course, the more you've got and the more diverse it is and the more distributed it is and the more critical it is, so the management system gives more value for money, because keeping in control is better value. However, one of the items I didn't cover in the presentation was a cross-cutting thread of basically scalability of the standard and the degree to which it can be descaled, detuned, even for SMEs, small to medium-sized enterprises. This is another learning point over the last few years, is how to make the management system proportionate. Now that means that the historical tendency for PAS 55 and ISO 55000 to be picked up by complex infrastructure industries, electrical, water, transport, petrochemical, oil and gas, that sort of sector, is going to migrate quite a lot further down into things like the manufacturing chain, facilities management, and indeed smaller independent organizations with discrete site function. There is a notable attribute of stringy assets, where a management system is particularly good because of geographical dispersion of a network and keeping your head above water and managing it all and sorting out priorities. is a bigger challenge than a single site, small team where everybody knows what's going on all the time anyway. I gave a paper last year on business unit critical mass, and as soon as you get above about 200 to 300 people associated, full-time equivalents, then a management system starts to cut in as being very beneficial to keep everybody on the same hymn sheet. And the payback for everybody adopting the same criteria for decision making, for risk management, for long-term planning and tactical operations. So what we're seeing is a trickle-down effect from the big multinationals and the complex infrastructures to the more discrete manufacturing, facilities management, service sector as well, picking up the relevant bits to them, not locked.
Sorry, John, to cut you. I've got Nabil Shetty who would like to speak. I've just unmuted him.
Great.
Nabil, you're free to speak if you're ready.
He has to unmute himself as well.
Okay.
I've seen Nabil's note about the uptake in the power, water, rail and airport.
Yeah.
Nabil is a member of TC251 and a very critical member of some of the material we've been presenting today. So if we can get him to contribute, it would be very helpful.
Yeah, I'll just message him to unmute himself as well. I've got another question coming in while he does that. What do you think about the intangible assets and the use of ISO 55000 for making intangible create value?
That's a great question. That's Anne-Sophie. It is designed to be asset type flexible. The standard basically defines an asset as anything of value or potential value, and reputation, morale, pride, brand, even intellectual assets and knowledge are absolutely fitting that bill. It can be quite tricky to understand the value realization chain, so what we used to call the line of sight, PAS 55 well, but the alignment language in ISO. The value realization needs to demonstrate that what we're doing is enhancing, not just sustaining, but enhancing, realization of value. Absolutely, I've seen some very good examples of pretty imaginative intangible assets being treated as assets in the scope of the management system. One of the better known ones in the UK is the National Air Traffic Control Operations, NATS, that treats each air corridor as the primary. In other words, a tube of air through which planes are guided safely. And their management system is built around the strategic development of our capacity to put aeroplanes through safe corridors of air. But the reputation, brand management is absolutely in the right line and target for this as well.
Just building on that, I think that we're all exposed to one key form of intangible asset nowadays. It's information. So depending on how you view information in your business, that in itself is one of the strangest assets of all, because it tends to appreciate with time rather than depreciate, as most of our assets do, the physical assets that we are looking after. So yeah, the concept of intangible, it's something that at various levels, various interpretations of 55,000 that we're seeing, that there is there's a lot of conversations going on about, and it's how to interpret that. But yeah.
Are there any other questions? We might not be able to hear people, but I think we can see people typing the questions, can't we?
Yeah. One thing I'd like to do as well is just turn around that first question on sectors to anyone who's on the call and say, where do you think it should go? Because if we can get the feedback to where it's needed from the communities who are using the standards, and then potentially we can help support in the right areas.
You can see that
I'll
Dave
add one.
Langdon's tried to ask a question.
Yeah.
I don't know whether you can see the chat screen, Dave, but perhaps you could type it in.
Oh, right, okay.
We can hear you, Dave.
Go ahead, Dave.
Oh, okay, yeah. Okay, yeah. Dave Langdon here in Perth, Australia, originally from the UK. I've been a lead assessor, assessing organisations on behalf of Lloyd's Register for the past 12 years in the asset management space. And yes, in terms of John's question or statement earlier on, I've assessed organisations as little as 35 employees in sort of independent gas transporter companies, right through to British Energy, all the nuclear power stations in the UK. I was quite disappointed when there was the presentation seemed to present the idea that nothing existed before ISO 55001. That, you know, its experience of the last 4 years. I think from my experience, what I've found is that people that have just come on board with ISO 55000 don't appreciate why PAS 55 came into being in the first place, and the sort of major concerns that there was in the asset management space as to why a standard was needed.
That's a really good point, Dave. Sorry, John here again. Thank you very much for that. The roots of 55,000 go back into the 1970s, and the work in what was ghastly terminology but called terror technology, and convergence with a whole load of work in standardization. Actually, fun enough, also, as you know, in Australia, particularly in the water sector and public sector in the East Coast, and the PAS 55 work, which went over 12 years of development and consultation with 10 countries and 15 different industries represented. Those all developed the roots that then have seen this latest iteration in 55,000.
Yeah, I think what I'm finding now is it's almost history repeating itself. When I was in the UK, and John, we first met about 20 years ago when I was in Scottish Power. There was initially the idea of there were certain people, so we say gaming. Can you still hear me?
Yep, absolutely. Call-in user number 10 is unmuted, and I think it's background noise from call-in.
Okay. Yeah, what I'm finding now is that people that are, shall we say, new to the idea of becoming certified against asset management, they're particularly from a Jazan perspective, they're deliberately skewing the idea of how they determine what are critical assets and trying to take shortcuts in terms of how long they think is required to undertake a formal assessment.
I'd certainly endorse that. I've observed the same behaviour. A couple more questions, I think, are coming in.
I think Hashad maybe might have been next if Hashad's still here.
Hashad, you're able to speak when you're ready. You've been unmuted.
Could you type your question in the chat box, Hashad? And in the meantime, hello?
Sophie, could you mute call user number 10 because of that noise?
We're just waiting to see if Hashad has a question.
Of course.
If not, Stuart Pickett also has a question. Sometimes the unmuting doesn't work.
I think Hashad needs to unmute from her side as well.
Type in the question.
John?
Yeah.
John, are you there?
Yes, I'm there.
It's stupidity, all right. When you talked before, very good, yeah. When you talked before about raising the bar and continually reviewing the standard, presumably you're talking about 55,001 as the standard itself, being pretty much maintained, but developing the guidance documents behind that, as you've done so far with 55,002 and going into 10 and 11 as well. That's where you see it going in terms of raising the bar and moving it beyond compliance?
There are two types of raising the bar. One is the guidance material being clearer about what is adequate achievement of existing 55,001 requirements, where there might be fuzzy expectations and therefore inconsistent certification applied. So raising the bar is effectively crystallizing the bar, to mix my metaphors, making it sharper edged, so more accountable for demonstrating achievement of the existing standard. And that's what the current guidance hopefully will improve and support. And then, of course, there's what is the requirement level, and that's the 01 document. And, of course, over the next few years, we'll be starting to talk about where to improve and refine those. So it's two levels of granularity. The guidance discussions are to make it clearer what is adequate and appropriate in the existing requirements.
Right, okay. Clearly from my own perspective, we talked before about this. I think when you look through the 01 document itself, and you're looking for most basic compliance with the shall statements, so there's in some organisations they don't go very much further than that. And it takes some effort to move into those, not necessarily upper echelons, but to properly take on board asset management. I think sometimes the 01 document doesn't promote sufficiently. In my eyes, what true asset management is all about. And you do need to refer to the guidance documents that sit behind it to get that further understanding and granularity with regard to not just meeting the standard, but applying asset management.
Absolutely. If we're talking about getting better at asset management, then 55,001 compliance is merely a milestone on the path. But you're absolutely right. But a lot of organisations are treating it as end game, and they relax once they've ticked the box, as it were, or been certified, and they need to demonstrate continual improvement as part of that attribute. But by and large, they do that as a minimalist approach, as opposed to a launch pad approach. Of now we can really start making it sing and dance and optimize. So that message needs to be reinforced, that a standard isn't a best practice definition. A standard is merely a competency checklist or structured approach to the demonstration of being competent at asset management. Merely competent. Correct.
Right. Okay. Thank you very much for that.
I think Harshad managed to write a question in there, which was about documented, what documentation is, and whether a SAMP had to be like a physical document, I guess, or something written. So my view on that, I'm sure the others might want to contribute as well, is that the important thing about documented information is not only that it's written somewhere, as in verbally communicated in some way, but also the method by which it's communicated. So if your organisation is sophisticated enough to be able to write something down and then communicate it in a web format by something interactive online, then I'm sure that would be an extremely effective way of communicating it for perhaps a dispersed organisation that had lots of sites very multinationally. So the important thing is that the ISO standard specifically identifies where documented information is needed, i.e. something written down and defined, but how you then choose to communicate that for your business, your organisation, is down to you, and there are also requirements in the ISO standard about that.
Thanks, Claire. John here. I led a team writing a guidance on what is a SAMP and why through the Institute of Asset Management, published last year. And the next 5002 has developed to exactly the same message, which is, as Naval has rightly added in the comments box, it gives us guidance on what a SAMP is designed to achieve. And that is difficult to do except writing it down in some form of consolidated, centralized way. A dispersed SAMP doesn't make sense. And we have to be very careful not to mix up the idea of a strategic asset management plan with the documentation of the management system. A management system manual is not the same as a SAMP. In fact, it is notably different. You don't even need a manual for a management system. You need the elements to exist, that need to be aligned and cross-referring, but it could be a dispersed description of how we manage assets and how we manage asset management. The SAMP is a very specific strategic planning document that does collate and concentrate where are we going, why, how are we going to get there, and then a number of enablers associated with doing so. So I would probably take a slightly different slant to what Claire has just said and say the SAMP itself probably does need to be a document and centralized in practical terms. Difficult to just or assure coherence unless that is the case. But the other parts of documentation of the management system, as Claire rightly says, they could be dispersed, they could be non-documentary, they can be in other forms of electronic navigational assistance. How we work as an organization managing our assets.
John, just build on I agree with everything you said around it has to be one single view of the truth, it has to be consolidated. I don't think it has to be a Word document or a PDF or something. It could be a web interactive item as long as it's coordinated. It is a central point of the truth and is not distributed from that perspective. And then the enhanced richness you can get from all the linkages to that and the line of sight and just that ability to click through and say, oh, well, why have I put this spanner on this item, and be able to take your maintenance instruction all the way back to the added value of keeping the air channel clear in the sky as part of that. So I think if you can achieve that, that's adding a huge amount of value.
What you're describing is alignment. The SAMP itself, I didn't say it had to be a Word document or a PowerPoint or any other particular manifestation, but I do believe it needs to be a single consolidated piece of narrative or illustration. It needs to be the way in which it could be at a single location, understood where are we going, why, and how we're going to get there. And then the pointers to who's going to do which bits of it and how. The how is external, the how is what asset management plans are. And the annex on SAMP makes that really clear, that the asset management plans represent the next level down of granularity and concrete commitment, and above that, the context, understanding stakeholders, understanding your existing RASI, your roles, responsibilities, your asset portfolio, health, condition, circumstances, dependencies. They are context for the appropriate things to do and how much to achieve. And that is a documentation exercise called a SAMP. The physical format of the SAMP can be very varied.
I think what this conversation is... Sorry, Tim. I think what this conversation is demonstrating is that there are different, slightly different views, even in the committee, and therefore it's helpful to have input from outside to help inform what we put into the guidance documents in the next stages, so that we can factor all of those elements into our future products for you.
Absolutely. I think this. I think this conversation is. It's probably one word, isn't it? It's that word documentation. In the same way, things like value, as soon as you start getting into different groups of people, it starts meaning such widely different things. And that, as you quite rightly say, Claire, we need to have that input and that understanding as to how things are moving forward.
Please note, Naval Shetty was a member of the team that wrote the annex on the SAMP, and he's just made a very important text, because we can't hear him. I'll read it out. He says, SAMP can be a set of web pages, but does need to be a single connected document. The definition of document, incidentally, is very explicit in ISO terms. It does not mean a web document. Document means a consolidated set of information in a clearly boundaried sense, and recorded, so it is auditable and explainable. So it doesn't necessarily mean it's printed paperwork. It doesn't necessarily mean it's developed in any particular software like Word or PowerPoint.
Absolutely. I think, though, that this is one of those nuances that as soon as you get outside of an ISO committee and someone picks up an extract of an ISO and it says document, that conjures up an image of a Word document, a piece of paper or something. I think anyone who starts working within these committees understands those little nuances. I mean, if you go to one of these committee meetings and say the word standard in the wrong place and it's actually a technical specification, all hell breaks loose, or new work instruction. I think we've got to be cognizant of that although we have to comply with the overall ISO terms, we have to make sure we illustrate this in the right way. And I think this is where a lot of the work that TC251 is doing on things like articles, case studies, can make those steps to make those connections to say, here's a good example of, say, a web-based interface where the SAMP and everything else is coming together and it's documented. But we don't have to use the words like document, etc., which conjure up things in people's heads.
I think we might have answered all the questions that have been asked. Are there any others?
Yeah, this is Eddie Bryan from Jaguar Land Rover Solihull. Thanks for the invite. Well-constructed information and discussion. Our journey is still walking, but there is a lot going on with the sector, as you can, I think in every sector there is at the moment. So my question is, what are the next steps maybe for JLR to join in these discussions? I think the involvement might enhance the views discussed today.
So,
go on, Tim.
No, Claire, go for it.
We mentioned as part of this discussion that we're looking for increased involvement from UK industry. So if you'd like to have a chat with us perhaps offline, we can make sure that we find a way for you to contribute to the documents that are still being developed, and work out the best way for you to do that in terms of what sort of time commitment and the types of input that you want to have. But we really welcome additional involvement from different sectors. So your views would be more than welcome in the committee.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Just echoing that. I think Stuart has reached out in the last sort of few weeks, and I think if we keep that conversation going and understand where we can provide the right support, I think it could be really, really useful getting yourselves engaged.
Yeah, thank you very much, both. That I think our department is open to them discussions to see the way forward.
Brilliant. We'll be in touch.
That'd be great, Edward. The motor sector hasn't really grasped the ISO 55000 family, despite having very strong roots in the ISO 9000, and obviously all the methodologies and three-letter acronyms of Lean and Six Sigma and everything else. Asset management might provide a very good next stage framework for harnessing all those best practices. I think the Toyota manufacturing system and its millions of variants has rippled around the whole industry for long enough. It's time to perhaps develop the asset management perspective that makes best use of such efficiency improvements, quality improvements, reliability improvements, and the like.
Yeah, I do agree with that as well. Obviously 9001 and there's 8001, 14001, all are really embedded into our company, but 55,000 isn't. It is, but it isn't shown to be. We don't see the same level of audits, anything compared to the others.
Which is interesting, given it's the one that brings value to the front and centre. So,
completely agree.
Very helpful.
I mean, the amount of material we have around us. I've been on some of you know, I've been trying to be on a journey for about 18 months, and the financial asset management is very strong within the group, but it's never displayed.
Sounds like a great opportunity for involving you in the 55010 work.
Thank you.
think Dave Landon would like to speak again. Dave, would you like to unmute yourself?
Yeah, just picking up on the last person's comment about the various other standards, 9,000, 14,000, etc. Really, my comment there about now that all the new standards are based around Annex XL, with what I like to refer to as having the same table of contents. Really, asset management is, I've found, to become like the umbrella management system. And all the new standards, they're really just a different lens on a business. Things like ISO 9000 can be applied in part to an organization, whereas 55,001 is the one that brings it all together. And as I say, from my experience, the 55,001, the asset management standard, once the light gets switched on, the penny drops, it becomes the umbrella, and all the other management systems fall underneath it and complement it.
Dave, I don't disagree. What I would say is need to be a little careful, because if you were sat on an ISO 9001 call right now, they would probably say exactly the same thing. And I think it's easy for us all to think of a discipline as the central. I think there's a. Sorry.
Tim, I'm not sure you're right there. I've talked to quite a lot of people responsible for their quality management and environmental system, and the Venn diagram of subject matter coverage does tend to favour what David has described. When you look at the clause requirements.
I don't disagree. But I've sat in similar meetings with the likes of 9,000. They say almost the same thing word for word. Resilience are coming along saying the same thing. So I don't disagree. But we need to be cognizant that there are other disciplines out there, and it is really important that they work together. And something we all need to be aware of is Annex SL has just been agreed for a revision. And one of the key reasons for that are words like risk. As it currently stands, the terms of risk used in 31,000, in 9,001, in 55,000 are slightly different with different inferences. So at the moment, although they kind of all look the same, and there's been a lot of great strides to make them more compliant with each other, there's still a way to go to get all the little wrinkles ironed out, which will take a fair chunk of time.
Yeah, Tim, if I could just respond to you? Yeah. I just wanted to say, Tim, that although I am I've been an advocate for asset management for a long time, I am also lead assessor for 9,001, 14,001, 45,001, and 27,001. So I've got my foot in all camps, and so I'm not totally biased towards asset management.
That's grand. And apologies. It's more that I see. But I've been lucky to work in quite a few areas, but similar to yourself, and it's interesting to see how everyone tends to think of themselves at the centre. And I think, interestingly, asset management can be that glue that sticks everything together in the right way. We've got to be careful how that's presented, I think. But are we wrapping up on time by the looks of things?
I think so.
Looking to the BSI colleagues.
Yeah, it's back to BSI. So I think we've answered all your questions. You can expect the PowerPoint slides to be emailed to you, available for you to download and save onto your personal laptop. Also, feel free to look at the BSI shop and the new standard on asset management, BSI 55002, which is now available and also available on ISO. Sophie, do you have any?
Thank you for joining us, everybody, and thank you very much to the three presenters. And thank you for all your questions. It was very interesting discussions. And if anyone has any questions at all, you can email Sagal, whose email was on the invite, or myself, Sophie Erskine. And thanks for joining us. It was a really interesting hour. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Many thanks.
My pleasure. Thank you for the questions too.